Good morning, everybody. This is Lori Meyer. I am excited to be here and part of the November stamp along. I hope you have already been stamping along with Tony and Joanne. They had some amazing projects. Thank you, ladies, so much. You always inspire me. And I really appreciate everybody who's tuned in right now to see the project that I will be sharing today. I have to apologize in advance. The way I have things set up, I'm not going to be able to look at the computer, so that I won't really be able to look at comments in real time, and I sincerely apologize for that. I'll try to do my best. Well, as I say that, I can see Tina. Hi, Tina. So just wanted to let people know. And hey, Martha. I will try to keep up with comments, and I sincerely apologize. It's just my setup isn't all that great. But let me go ahead and show you the inspiration that I had for the card that I'm going to share with you. And this has nothing to do with the holidays, but this is a card that I made quite a while ago, actually. It is a sidestep fun fold, and I'm sure those of you who've been demonstrators for a while probably recognize the stamp set that I used. But what I wanted to do, since I really like making sidestep cards, is I wanted to figure out how to make a sidestep that would work well with a slimline card and also have a little bit of a twist involved. And this is what I came up with. Hey, Carol. This is a card that fits into a business size or a resume size envelope. It is a sidestep card. You can see it's a double sidestep. It has steps on the left and the right, and then a panel in the middle. And it also has an easel on the bottom that allows it to sit a little bit better. So you can sit it up on a mantle or a dresser, whatever it may be, and it will actually hold pretty well. So I wanted to, as I mentioned, figure out how to make a sidestep card that would do well in a slimline design, because I'm really enjoying making slimline cards. I just think there's so much room to put any kind of embellishment that you want, or any kind of occasion that you want to make a card for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of show you how to demystify this. This is the card base, and honestly, if you've not made a sidestep card before, it's really not hard. There are very few cuts and a couple of score lines that you need to do. So I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to show you how to create the card base. That is the most important part of doing this. And then we're going to get into the decorations. And what I did is I created another base, because it's just easier for me to talk to sort of a blank canvas and show you. I'm going to make one of these. In fact, we're going to make one together. But I wanted to show you what the base looks like without any of the decorations. And you're going to see that there are only two cuts right here. There are two cuts that are made, and then there are some score lines that are made. And I really hope that if you haven't made a sidestep card before, that by following the steps that we're going to do today, that you get inspired to make one. And I truly hope that you find that this is not as difficult as it might look. And I will be posting some directions. But before I post this, because it looks a little crazy, I wanted to make sure that I go through and I explain what it is that I'm doing here, because if I just posted this, I think people would probably say, you've lost your ever-loving mind. So we're going to jump in. The things that you are going to need to make your card base: you're going to need a paper trimmer, and with that trimmer, you're going to need both a cutting blade and also a scoring blade. And you're also going to need one piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock. I am using thick whisper white for this. because I really want to make sure that the card base is substantial. And the first thing that I'm going to do is slightly alter the size of this piece. I'm going to take 1/2 inch off the 11-inch side. So I'm going to end up with a piece that is 8.5 by 10.5. And I'm going to put that piece that I just cut off to the side. And this is going to be the size that I'm going to use to make the card. I'm going to bring my little model back in. And one thing I'll tell you is when you make a sidestep card, the first thing you want to do is make the cuts. You want to make those for a couple of reasons. It helps you to get an idea of the size that you're going to use for the inside area and also your steps. But also, and probably more importantly, the cuts are a visual cue of where you're going to put a couple of the score lines. So I'm going to start with the cuts. And I also want to point out the orientation of the paper. I have this so that it's at 8.5 on the horizontal side. In other words, I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at it so I see the 8.5 going horizontally. And I'm going to make the cuts vertically. When I do sidestep cards, the size that I use, which is a little different than some people, I make my, I'm sorry, not sidestep, slimline cards. I make them 4 inches high and 8.5 inches long. And I do that because I can conserve on paper when I actually cut them. I decided when I was making this sidestep card that I wanted to have 4 inches in the middle to actually put my decoration. And let me pull that back in. I just wanted to have a big area where I could put the decoration for the middle. So if this is 4 inches in the middle and the total width or length of the card is 8.5, if you take 8.5, take off 4, you've got 4.5 inches left. Well, I wanted these two side steps to be the same width. So 4.5 divided by 2, I'm going to bring each of these in 2.25. All right, so I am going to be making these cuts 2.25 inches from either side. And that way I will have my side steps are going to be the same width on each side. I also decided that I wanted to have a pretty nice base here, and I made this 1.5 inches high. And that's important because I'm going to start my cut 1.5 inches from the bottom of the paper. One more thing, and then I'll show you the cut, is this is probably the most important thing to know when you're doing a sidestep card, is whatever height your card is going to be, and remember I said that I make these 4 inches high, that is how long you want your cut to be. And just trust me on that. I promise it works, and it works regardless of the orientation of your paper. So let's take all of that into account. I'm going to pull in my cutting board. And again, I apologize that I do not have a Stampin' Up! Cutting board. And I'm going to place my paper in here so that the bottom is at 2.25. And then what we all know is that on the arm of a cutting board, we have a ruler. And what's really nice is we can place the blade not at the edge, but if we want to make a cut inside the edge, we can actually place the blade where we want the blade to be, push that down just a little bit, and then drag it up as far as we want the cut. And on my cutting board, this bump on the top of the blade tells me where it's actually cutting on the bottom side. So it's a really great visual. All right, so I'm at 2.25. I'm going to bring my blade up, and I'm going to have that at 1.5 inches up. And I know that my cutting board goes to 12.5. So I'm going to put it at 11. So I'm just bringing it up 1.5 inches. And then if I want to drag that up 4 inches, that means that I'm going to put this in, give it a push. 11 minus 4 is 7. So I'm going to push that up to the 7-inch line and just stop there. So that's my first cut. And you can see I cut in the middle of the paper. Well, I know that I have the 4 inches that is going to be in the middle. So I need to move my paper over 4 inches and do the exact same thing on the other side. So if I'm at 2 1/4, I'm going to move it over 4 inches and I'm going to be at 6 1/4. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to bring my blade down to the 11-inch mark, which is 1.5 inches from the bottom. I'm going to push that in, and then I'm going to drag it up to the 7-inch line. Those are the 2 cuts that I need. These are the only cuts that I'm going to make on this card. The rest of it is score lines. So let's take a look again at the mocked up one that I did. And let's talk a little bit about the score lines. And again, these are not many, and they're not mystical or magical. We're going to do 2 score lines at the beginning of the cut and the end of the cut on either side. And that is so that we can fold the side steps where they need to go. So we're going to put one right at the end of each of them, each of the cuts. The other score line that we're going to do is going to be double the distance from the edge. So we made this 1.5 inches. We need to make this 3 inches. And that way it is going to fold right in half at the bottom. Okay, so the way we're going to do that is we're going to take our paper. I always take out the blade that I don't need from my cutter, just so I don't cut when I'm trying to score or score when I'm trying to cut. It's just a little nerve-wracking, and Lord knows I have messed up paper before. So what I want to do is I want to put a score line from the bottom of my cut to the outside of the paper. And let's just look at that again. From the bottom of the cut to the outside of the paper. Same thing at the top of where I've cut. And I should be able to put my paper at 1.5 inches because that's where I started the cut when I made the cut. And I'm using my scoring blade, and I'm just going to bring that up to that 1.5 inches, and I'm going to score right there. Then I'm going to scoot my paper down, and I am bringing that to 5.5 because I need to move that 4 inches. My cut is 4 inches. So I had this at 1.5. I'm putting it at 5.5. And I am going to do the exact same thing here. I'm just going to bring this in and make a score line. And then I'm going to turn this around, and I'm going to do the same scores exactly like I had it on the other side. So all I'm doing here is I'm making a score line at the top of my cut and at the bottom of my cut. And I'm actually cheating a little bit because I'm lining up that score line right in the little groove on my paper cutter. And I'm just going to come in and score that. All right, so I have the scores at the top of my cuts and at the bottom of my cuts. That's great. I need a couple more score lines, and then I will be all set to go with the side step. So let's again bring this in. We've done the 2 score lines top and bottom on each side. Let's go ahead and put the 3rd score line on either side of the step. and it's going to be twice the distance from the bottom. This was 1.5 inches, so that's going to be at 3 inches. So if I bring my paper back in, put this at 3 inches right here, and I get my scoring blade, and I just bring that right up to where I've got that cut. And then I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to cheat and line up that score line on the other side. And I'm going to score it again. So now I've made all 3 score lines that I need for the side step. There are only 2 more score lines that I need to do, and then I'm all set with the card. One is I need the score line for the piece that is going to be the middle. Well, remember, this is 4 inches high. So I'm going to orient my paper, putting it in at 4 inches. So it's at 4 inches right here. And then visually, I can bring my scoring blade up to where I have the beginning of the cut. I'm going to put that down, and I'm just going to follow that over to where the cut ends. And I have my 4-inch score line. The last score that I'm going to make is for the easel part. And this is optional. You don't need to use the easel. You might want to actually just have a side step card that will sit up without the easel, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But if you do want to make the easel, this score line is 2.5 inches from the edge. So if I orient my paper, I want the score line to be 2.5 inches in from this edge. I'm going to put it over at 2.5. And I'm going to score all the way across. And I have just done all the cuts and the score lines that I need to do for this card. So let me just reiterate this really quickly. The first thing you need to do when you're doing a side step is you need to make the cuts. And these were 2.25 inches from each side. I did them 1.5 inches from the bottom, and I made them 4 inches long. Then when I have those cuts, I have a visual cue of where I need to put score lines. One goes at the top of the cut, one goes at the bottom of the cut. The other score line on this side step is going to be twice the distance from the bottom. This is 1.5 inches to that first score line. That means this is 3 inches. I know my card is 4 inches high. I put a score line in at 4. And then if you want to do the easel part, you put it in at 2.5. And there you have it. It really is that straightforward to do. And then the next part that you do is you burnish. So we are going to just start to fold the card a little gently. It does take a little convincing to turn into a side step, but it is not too difficult. So I am gently convincing it that it needs to bend. And what I like to do is to fold everything together and then get out my bone folder and really give everything a nice burnish. And this is important, especially depending upon what the weight is of any kind of embellishments that you may be putting onto your card. And just give it a really nice burnish. Don't forget about the folds that you have inside your side step. Make sure that you give them a nice burnish as well. And then you've got your base. The easel part, I am going to fold up because I want that to be something that the side step is going to be able to sit on. And I also want to make sure that when I fold this in, that I have the capability of still making sure that everything is going to fold down so that I can put it into an envelope. Okay, so here's our canvas. We have the side step that we just made, and now we can figure out how we want to decorate it. I did want to mention that if you don't want that easel part, what you can do is you can trim your paper and you can take off that piece. If you start with an 8.5 by 11, you would actually take 3 inches off because you want to end up with 8.5 by 8. And if you get to this point and you think, you know what, I really don't need that bottom piece, then just get your paper cutter out and you can trim that piece off. The way I decided that I wanted to decorate this card is I used quite a few pieces from the Poinsettia Place suite, and I started with the middle piece, and I used cherry cobbler and also garden green cardstock. Because I have 4 inches by 4 inches to play with, I wanted to have a series of concentric frames to actually use as the backdrop. And what I decided to do there is I got out my pieces of paper and I cut the cherry cobbler to 3 3/4 inch square. Wanted to have a little bit of a border around the focal point. I don't know why, but I like to have just a little bit of a frame so that the actual design has a border around it. To me, this looked like a place that I could kind of put a picture. That would be the centerpiece. So the cherry cobbler here is 3 3/4 inches square. The garden green is 3.5 inches square. And I wanted to have about 1/8 of an inch on either side as the piece that would show through. And I also wanted to make sure that on that cherry cobbler piece, that it wasn't quite the 4 by 4, because again, I wanted the background of my whisper white to show. Then I cut a piece of designer series paper to 3 1/4 inch square, and again have kind of those concentric circles working. And that was put exactly in the middle of my card. That's going to be the focal point. I definitely am a traditionalist, although I've been trying to get outside my little box of greens and reds at Christmas. And I've done some blues and silvers, which are gorgeous also. And I just put that in the middle, just trying to get that kind of as a centerpiece and a focal point. You could obviously make your focal point so that it just used the top part of the center. I decided I wanted it to be the full. Then I concentrated a little bit on the side panels. And one thing I will caution you on is, and I'm sure you know this from side steps that you've made and seen, just be careful that when you put decorations on the back parts of the side step, make sure that when you're looking at the card from the front, you can see what you're putting here. If you put little creatures or trinkets or anything down below, you may not see those, and you probably want to be able to see how you're decorating. I decided to mimic what I did in the middle on the sides, and you can see that here in the final card. So on the sides, again, I used cherry cobbler, garden green, and then some of the designer series paper. And I wanted to have the same amount of border on the sides as I did on the front. So the sides the cherry cobbler is cut to 2 1/4 by 2. The garden green is 2 by 1 3/4, and that gives me just that 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And then the designer series paper is 1 3/4 by 1 1/2. And I thought it was kind of nice to have the same sort of dimensions and framing on the sides as I had in the center. There are a lot of folks who make the sidestep cards and really leave the sidestep pieces alone. I'll show you one in a minute that is a sympathy card that is very, very plain, very undecorated, because it was really meant to be more of a sympathy and striking on that note rather than being super fancy. So you can choose how fancy or unfancy you do the sides. But again, I thought it would be nice to kind of mimic what I did. And this may sound crazy, but I also paid attention when I was using this designer series paper to make sure that I got the right orientation, because there are some boughs that are on this paper that kind of look like they're upside down, and I wanted to see if I could get the boughs as pointed up. I know that's not even the right English, but I'll use it because I haven't had a lot of coffee yet. Pointing up on my paper, just to give a more of an uplifted kind of feel. And you can see you've got some room to stick your fingers behind here and get everything together. And I'm going to go ahead and put the other piece on as well. So we've got our 2 side panels behind the front decorated, and they mirror what is on the inside. And then I decided that I wanted to add a little bit of bling. And the bling that I added comes from the amazing dies. These are from the Poinsettia dies. And I also didn't mention that I stamped Merry Christmas in cherry cobbler on the bottom of the designer series paper before I put that all together. I cut out 5 layers of the Poinsettia dies in cherry cobbler. I also cut out multiple leaves in garden green, and decided that I wanted to put a poinsettia kind of on the left side of this. And then I used 3 of the leaves, and I found a punch that I have that has some nice circles, and I just punched out 3 little berries from the cherry cobbler piece, and I put those together. So I've already put some of these dies together. I know you are all familiar with these dies. These dies are absolutely amazing. And one thing I do with mine is I keep a little bit of washi tape on the ones that I want to cut together, and I just put them back into the case on the magnetic piece that I have. That way it's just a little bit easier to manipulate when I want to. And I went ahead and I put my poinsettia on the card. One thing that I would like to point out is when you are doing this and when you are putting your embellishments onto a card like this, just like other cards, make sure you pay attention to where the edges are. You don't want to, for example, put a leaf on this card that is going to be way over the top, because you may not be able to get that into the envelope that you're working with. So when I was putting all of my pieces onto the card, I kept reimagining and looking at it and making sure that when I put this into the envelope, that everything that I've put onto this card fits into the shape of the envelope that I am using. The poinsettia, again, is actually 5 layers of the die cuts from the poinsettia dies. The little berries that I put over here are 3 of the leaves, and I curled those up, and then I put glue dots onto the circles that I have on the front of my leaves, and I just attached that directly. The center of the poinsettia is one of these absolutely stunning beaded pearls, and I use a large glue dot when I put that in the middle, when I put the beaded pearl. I have these from Paper Pumpkin kits, and I think I've kept every glue dot that I ever got from a Paper Pumpkin kit, and they certainly come in handy. And the way that I've been using the poinsettia dies is I will start to construct the piece that I'm going to put on. And for example, I will figure out where I am going to put that poinsettia. And if I wanted to put it here, then I'm going to grab a leaf or 2, and I am going to figure out, where do I want those leaves to go? And I will rearrange these a couple of times before I really figure out exactly where I want them to be. And you have a choice. You can attach the leaves directly to the card, or you can attach the leaves to the back of the poinsettia, whichever one you like better, whichever is easier for you. And I get everything put down with my leaves. I make sure that I really like how I have everything put in place. And then I attach the poinsettia. And the way that I usually attach the poinsettia is with a dimensional. And I'll put that right in the center, and I'll put the piece directly on the card. Then I take the sprigs that have been cut either out of the metallic cardstock, or in this case, I also wanted some white that would really pull in the color of the card base, because I didn't want that to get lost. And the way I attach these is I put glue dots on some of the little round areas, and then I will glue those, I will tuck them in to where I want them to go. And that's how I designed this card. So there's a lot going on with this, but it really is a very straightforward card to make. And I just wanted to show you 2 things really quickly as sort of alternative ideas that you can use from a sidestep card. And they are exactly the same as the ones that we just did. And let me show you one that I made as a sympathy card. It is exactly the same dimensions that we just talked about. It was cut exactly the same way. The difference is I cut off that easel, and it's a much more simple card. It was meant to be a simple card. I tend to make the condolence cards very, very, very simple. But this again is the same kind of cut, same design that we just went through. There are also single side steps that you can do. And this is not mysterious. This is 4 inches high. This is actually midpoint. So if this is 8.5 inches wide, this cut is at the 4 1/4 mark, right in the middle. This is 1 inch. Not 1.5 inches. So you can decide how big you want that front to be. So all I did here was I came in 4 1/4 from the side. I cut a 4-inch line or 4-inch cut, and then I've got the top and the bottom of that cut as a visual where I need that score line to be. I know that if I have an inch on the bottom, the second score line needs to be at 2 so that it's going to fold together. And then because this is 4 inches high, I know that's where my score line needs to be. So the freedom you have on cards like this is almost endless. You can make the steps as large or as small as you want, and obviously then the middle or the side as large or as small as you want. I could have put this on the other side if I'd wanted to. So get out your scoring board, your cutting board, grab a piece of cardstock that you can just kind of play with and make sure that you can get these cuts down. And I promise you, once you've tried this once, you're going to say, that's pretty cool, and I can do this. And you are going to make some absolutely stunning cards that people are going to open and display on their mantles, their dressers, and just really, really enjoy. So I will post the instructions that I've gone through and my kind of handwritten note as far as where to make the cuts and the scores. But I really, really hope that you will give this a try, and I really look forward to seeing all the kinds of cards that you make. Think of this, you know, I've got some ideas just to share really fast. Think of a wedding card. You could have the bride on one side, the groom on the other side, and something in the middle that would be really fun. For a birthday, you could have a present and a cake in the middle. Again, endless ideas. So I really look forward to seeing everything that you guys make, and I sincerely appreciate your time this morning. The next person who is going to be doing a live today is Tracy, and she will be on at noon, and I will be watching, and I hope you will be as well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time this morning, and I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye-bye.